So for today, we have a video that we need to do on the NAFTA, inequality and immigration, and Maquilapolis. Excuse my pronunciation. We have two questions. The first is, what is NAFTA? And the second is, how can we see NAFTA, inequality and immigration reflected in the documentary? And so NAFTA was essentially the acronym spells out North American Free Trade Agreement, and it was essentially intended to be Mexico's like one-way ticket into the first world, and it was supposed to be a win-win situation for the United States and Mexico, and consumers, would get cheaper food, producers would be more efficient, and immigration would decrease, according to the article that we read. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case at all, as we can tell based off of, years later. There was actually a bigger gap created by NAFTA, where but then there's a bigger gap created from NAFTA in comparison to previously when it wasn't implemented. There's been no growth, no job creation. In other words, NAFTA just made Mexico vulnerable and it was not a win-win deal. Some organizations like Cargill have actually come in and completely monopolized an entire industry from start to finish. For example, the corn industry and tortillas, which was discussed in the article. Essentially, Cargill came in, bought up all the corn, went and created their own factories and withheld it until it got to the point where the price for it could be essentially milked, and so they could have the inflation of charging people at least twice as much as they would pay for their tortillas made from the corn. And tortillas are very much like a food staple of the communities in Mexico. So by withholding this corn and withholding the tortillas and waiting until they can go and make a huge profit off of it, that was very much so attacking and hurting a lot of those small communities. Now, regarding the second question, how can we see NAFTA inequality and immigration reflected in the documentary? The documentary, frankly, was very hard to watch, especially when it came to basic infrastructure, like how the river and all the runoff from the factories would go through the villages and go and cause people to get ill and sick, especially children that once they're born, they have so many defects that it's just, there's no way for even a baby to be defended from all the stuff that's happening in their environment. Or with electrical wires, how they're just kind of laying out in the middle of the road, waiting to short circuit, fizzing because of the water that are getting into them, electrocuting children. And so there's a lot of basic infrastructure issues that are just being completely overlooked and promised, to fix by the politicians of the area, but nothing comes of it. Regarding the inequalities in the workplaces, a lot of women work in the factories when factories are very prevalent in that area in Mexico, and those women were treated essentially like one and done, like, oh, we can just find a replacement for her if she becomes too much of a hassle. Women, they're very docile, they're very quiet, they'll do what we want them to do, we don't have to pay them much. And so there's a big inequality regarding how people are being treated in the factories and also in those communities in comparison to all the people that are coming in, all the people from the United States to get tax breaks and get cheap labor. And then as soon as cheap labor, even cheaper labor, was found in Asia, all those factories just pick up and leave, sometimes not even paying severance wages to their workers, which then makes their workers have to go to court, and it's a long legal battle. And thankfully, one of the women in the documentary ended up winning her case, same thing with her coworkers, and they got way more than they thought they were going to get. But just the thought of not knowing whether or not you're being actively poisoned by your environment, or finding out too late, like how she was affected by the lead in her work environment. She had to take a whole year off, and now whenever she goes into a place of work, if there's even the slightest amount of lead there, she gets sick again. Like just basic stuff like that. And then also just with your children not being able to make enough money, because they make roughly, one of them made around $68 like US dollars a week, which is not enough to sustain your family with basic necessities. And so it was just extremely upsetting and disheartening as a person who has been born and has lived their entire life in the United States to see how over and over and over again the United States just keep attacking and milking these other countries, especially from Latin America, for all they're worth, just for our capitalist gain, just to go and, make us another world superpower, but at the cost of how many lives, at the cost of how many livelihoods, at the cost of people just being able to live and be healthy and survive just with basic necessities. So it was a hard documentary to watch, and even harder to just kind of sit there and realize that a lot of the immigration problems that we have currently are because of the United States, as shown through the documentary and also through the article. And yet immigration is such a hot topic in the United States, like, oh well, it's not our fault their countries are going to hell, and other BS statements like that. But it is our fault. Like, it is our government's fault. It is the corporations that run for the United States fault. It's our fault, and we're not taking responsibility and helping out with that. And when we do decide to help out with that, it's like pulling teeth. So those are the two questions that we had to answer. My video was a little bit long, but those are the two questions. The video very much so irritated me, and that's it.